All right, I was reading this article on Yahoo today, and it was really good. And they put out the call to nurses to share what they had experienced or what they had heard from patients who were basically in their last moments on their deathbed. Not always in their last moments. Um, so I wanted to read. I think there's like 50 submissions, and some of them are really good, and some of them will make you shake your head at some of the things that people said. And I have some of my own stories from the time I was volunteering in 2001 at a veterans hospital on Long Island. A couple of stories there. One story from when I was in high school related to death, not a deathbed vision or deathbed experience or anything like that with a family member, but I'll tell that later. And so starts out Yahoo's like recently nurses, they asked what were the most haunting things someone said on their deathbed. And a lot of nurses and healthcare practitioners shared their experiences as well as individuals. So it wasn't just it wasn't just nurses and healthcare workers. It was all different kinds of people. So they shared their stories about what they heard when a loved one from a loved one shortly before they passed away. So let me go through some of these. First one, I'm not a nurse, but I'm an EMTB on the 911 unit. We'd gotten a call about a hit and run, and cops were on the scene first. Some guy and his girlfriend had gotten into a fight in a parking lot. It ended up with him running her over and then backing up over her. She wasn't doing well, and her vitals were tanking. We loaded up, and she kept mumbling, "Tell my mom, please tell my mom." Naturally, I figured she was asking us to let her mom know she was hurt. The hospital was going to take care of that, so I put it out of my mind as we were working over her. She flatlined before we arrived. They didn't get her back. My partner was finishing up her paperwork and turned to give her wallet back to the staff. The nurse on duty, who I knew well, was reading a dirty piece of paper. She looked disgusted. When I asked what was up, she put the piece of paperwork down. It was a letter that was picked up near her purse on the scene. The girl who died had gotten accepted into college, and she wanted them to tell her mom that she had gotten accepted into college. That was the last thing she said. Sad story. Not all of these stories are different. Next one is right before my grandma died, her heart rate shot up to the 220s. As the monitor started sounding all sorts of alarms, she yelled out, "Am I supposed to stop breathing now?" So a lot of these are comedic. I don't know if they're meant to be funny. Some of them you'll see. The person was very, very lighthearted in a tough situation. Let me see if I can move this over a little bit. There we go. Here's a story. I had to tell my grandmother that dialysis would only give her a week or so to live. And it was her choice to try it or not. She was in and out of consciousness at that point, but she was in a clear state for the moment. And that's something you hear all the time. People are on their deathbed, they're out of it, and all of a sudden they make this comeback and they seem like they're getting better and they're fine. And that's just really common. And then they die. Um, she asked, "Will I die?" I said, "Yes." She looked me in the eye, smiled just a little, and said, "Sometimes you got to do what you don't want to do." She closed her eyes, squeezed my hand, and slept until she passed a day later. Fourth one. I'm not a nurse, but my grandfather was put into a 24/7 care home with severe Parkinson's. My mom and grandma had spent 4 years basically taking care of him constantly, and they needed a break for a couple of weeks. They visited him every other day in shifts, but I went home one day alone. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I need you to get me home so I can die. I can't do it here." I tried saying everything I could to the nurses and my family to get him home without saying what he told me. 24 hours later, he got rushed to the ER. As he was dying, he looked at me and said, "Don't let it bother you," and died. So yeah, she didn't get him home, but he was like, "It's fine. Don't worry about it." And some of these stories are, you know, they're not going to make you say, "Oh my god," but some of them are. Some of them will make you think about it, and we'll get to those. I had a patient whose memory had been fading for years. It's weird. Right before a patient dies, like I said, sometimes they'll suddenly appear to be doing a lot better. This is really weird. Why does that happen? It happens so many times if you read stories about people who are dying. Totally out of it. Next thing you know, it's like, oh, they're fine. They're going to get better. People who don't know about that think they're getting better. And then they pass away really soon after. Anyway, he thought I was his late wife. I played along and just listened to him while he recalled his engagement, his wedding, his first childbirth, and a few other memories. At one point, he says, "Oh, Irene, there you are. Sorry. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. Well, thank you for listening to an old man tell his stories. I hope you have great stories to tell one day, too. I'm coming, Irene." Then he passed. You hear people talking about their dead relatives all the time. There's so many stories about people right before they die, they start seeing friends and relatives at their bedside. Is it really their friends and relatives? I don't know. I don't know. Later on, there's a story you'll see where I start, and I've said this before when remote viewer Joe McMonagle had a remote viewing session of a UFO event, and his father popped into the event, and McMonagle said, "You're not my father," because the guy was acting different than his father had acted when he was alive. His father was dead, so this being was kind of like if you believe the story, take it at face value. This being was pretending to be his father, and McMonagle wouldn't have it. He's basically like, "You're not my dad," and the thing just popped out. So I've brought this up before in close encounter cases where people during the day they'll have an encounter with their dead relative, and then at night they'll have a close encounter case. So was that really their dead relative they experienced or encountered during the day? It's impossible to know that. Just like in mediumship, even in physical mediumship, where the person allegedly comes into the room physically, um, is that really your dead loved one? There's no way to know. Just because they look like your dead relative and they tell you details about your life, there's no way to prove that's who it is. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. And I know people are like, no, I felt it. I had the experience. I felt the love. Maybe that's exactly what it is, but it's impossible to prove that. And that I know that's cynical, but that's how I am with that kind of evidence. Meanwhile, I'm skipping stories here. Many moons ago when I was a nurse, let me see if anybody's, and I'm not going to share if people later on, if you want to jump in on video and share stories like this, you're free. Um, well, let me continue. Many moons ago, when I was a nursing student, a man in his 40s was lying on his deathbed from terminal cancer with his sobbing wife lying in bed next to him. He looked at his wife and, using the last bit of energy he had, gently wiped away her tears and stroked her cheek. He took off his oxygen mask and said, "Don't worry, love. Don't be afraid. It's just death," and passed shortly after. I'm a former, I think CNA is a nurse assistant in the dementia unit of an assisted living facility. This is another story for those listening on audio, which I promise tomorrow I will do my best to get these onto a podcast site so the audio folks can just listen on the way to work or wherever. Former nurse assistant in the dementia unit of an assisted living facility. My dad is on the way to pick me up now. She said every time I checked on her, and now I'm kind of confused on this story. My dad is on his way to pick me up now. She said every time I checked on her until she died about a week after it started. While she was still mobile, she would tidy her room on the edge of her bed and just wait most of the day. Basically, she was waiting for somebody to come get her. So when she died, they would come greet her. That's another thing. We'll talk about people when they die. Somebody's coming to show them the way how to cross over. And it, to me, it's really odd, but I'll save that for later. I will interrupt with my own stories. Let me see. One of my own stories, my first story, it's not my first story dealing with death. That was my great grandmother, which as a kid did not really affect me as far as I could tell until I was at the funeral. Then I just started crying my eyes out. Must have been like 6 or 7. That was my first funeral. But later on, I was in ninth to 10th grade, and I've told this story before. I had a huge crush on this gymnast, Robin, and I sat behind her in class, and my friend next to me also had a crush on her, Douglas Cabrini. We would always battle for her attention. And then one day I go home, and I knew nothing about her home life whatsoever. It was always school. I was on the soccer team. She was a gymnast. So I think it was English class, but we never talked anything about our home lives. And I go home, go to sleep, and I have a dream. And I think at the time my sister was pregnant. And in the dream, we go to see my sister in the hospital, and lo and behold, Robin is in the hospital. I'm like, "Wow, what are you doing here?" And she's like, "My mother died. My mother died, and I really have nowhere to go right now." So in my dream, I convinced my mom to let Robin come stay with us. I was being selfish. I wanted to spend time with her. So in the dream, I'm like, "Oh, well, her mother died and she has nowhere to go. Mom, please let her come over." That's the dream. My mother dies. The next day or the day after, going to school, she's not there, and it's possible she was absent the day of my dream. I'm not sure, but we're always absent from school. You don't think anything of it. Lots of people are. They're sick. Um, anyway, she's out. She comes back a couple of days later, and me and Doug are like, "Why were you out?" And she's like, "My mother died." And Doug is like, "You're lying," because she just said it so matter of fact. She's like, "No, she had cancer. She was sick for a long time, so we were expecting it. But yeah, my mother died." So I dreamt it before it happened. Had no lead in, no information that her mom was sick. Like I said, no information about her family whatsoever. 40 years later, last year, I looked her up on Facebook, sent her a message, told her what happened. She remembered me. She confirmed a lot of the details about her mom being sick with cancer. She told me her own personal story. She was like, "Yeah, that's amazing that you had that happen." And I never told her until 40 years later. And then she goes, "Oh, you're in Vegas, by the way." She was in Carolina. She goes, "My son works for the Golden Knights hockey team where I worked." And that night, he came to see me and we spoke. And I'm like, I got to see her son. It was really a weird coincidence. But so that's my story. That was my first story. But I didn't think it was some premonition at the time. I didn't know what that was. It's just like, oh, okay, had a dream. Just so turns out in my dream she died, and then the next day she's dead. I find out her mother's dead. So kind of weird. Not the only time I had a dream about somebody dying the day before or a couple of days before. Next story from the Yahoo article. I started my nursing career on a palliative unit. In my first 3 months as a registered nurse, I pronounced 7 deaths. The one patient had advanced dementia and often believed he was at work while he was awake in the hospital. He would often give us, the nurses and care aides, tasks and jobs to do, and as he believed himself to be our superior. One day near the end of December, he asks me, "When is New Year's? What day is it this year?" I tell him New Year's will be coming up Tuesday. He nods and tells me that he thinks he's going to have to quit after the new year. This job is getting too difficult for him and he can't keep up. It's time to retire. I tell him we appreciate all the hard work he's done and how we'll miss him terribly when he's gone, and that he was a great employee whom we all loved working with. That Tuesday, January 1st, he passed away peacefully in his sleep at 2 a.m. I will never forget that conversation. The grandmother grasped at the nurse's hand and said, "I think I'm going to die now." The nurse was telling her no. She was doing much better and would likely leave soon, meaning leave the hospital. But my grandmother was gone before she could finish her sentence. See, people know. The last quote is she knew. Some people just know. And some people can actually hold off on dying. And then, as I'll share a story later, I'll just quickly When my mom was sick in 2010, she was hanging on in hospice for like an entire week. And it's like the doctor's like, it's just a matter of time. And we're like, why is she holding on? And then my dad, one night, my sisters convinced him to talk to her, whisper in her ear, and say, it's okay to go. That night, after she heard that, she died. So it seems like people can hold on for whatever reason. And then once they decide, they can go. Here's another one. How will I explain this mess? This one's, I read most of these today. In fact, I read all of them. How will I explain this mess? He asked while pointing to his butt. This lad comes in after a car accident. His work van had flipped and rolled. The fellow was wheeled in fully conscious with no pain or disorientation. However, he was completely twisted in half from the midsection down. There was no way he would survive untwisting, but the blood vessels must have been cinched in such a way that he didn't bleed out. Doctors and nurses explained the situation to him and suggested his family come to say goodbye. He looked like he was lounging on the couch watching TV with a blanket over his lower half. Once the realization set in, he replied with, "How will I explain this mess?" It's like it's just horrible. I mean, it's twisted in half, but it's like, I mean, yeah, what are you gonna say? Sorry, I don't even know what to say to that. 12. I'm scared. He was an elderly gentleman with worsening congestive heart failure who was incapacitated. His wife put him in hospice and he was comfort measures only. So in other words, you don't try to you don't try to get the person better, you just make them comfortable, pain medicine. That's what palliative care is, which I have experience spending time in, which I'll share that too. So this guy's in a hospice. He was comfort measures only. I was at the nurse's station and I could hear him starting to gasp for air. I walked into the room and he was struggling to breathe. I put my stethoscope up to his back, but I already knew what was happening. His lungs were full of fluid. I sat him in bed and he stared at me, eyes wide open, head slightly tilted back with a facial expression of full blown panic. I'm scared. Immediately after he said the words, his oxygen mask started filling up with pinkish red, frothy foam running down his face and dripping onto his gown. He was dead within minutes, and all I could do was watch him. I will never forget his face. That's probably the worst story of all the stories in here. It's also graphic. Kind of not. I'm not really sure why that one was included, but I guess they included everything they received. Um, Here's another one. I'm a nursing student in Canada, and my palliative rotation, I had a patient that was getting medically assisted dying the next day. So euthanasia was occurring the next day. He was an elderly cancer patient. He told me he was a self ordained minister, nothing official, but an at home type preacher, and that I could confess to him anything I wanted. I humored him and whispered to him some of my biggest secrets. I figured, who cares? He's going to die tomorrow. He told me it was all right, and I could tell he appreciated that I confided in him. He also told me his email address and said that while he would not be sending emails in return, he would be receiving them. That's not that great. I will share what I was talking about palliative care. So, summer of 2001. I don't know if you guys know who Daniel Brinkley is. Let me get rid of this for a second. No, I'm going to, here, if I go to that. So, I'll save that for later. So, summer of 2001. Daniel Brinkley, he wrote Saved by the Light and At Peace in the Light, which he was his first time. I don't know if it was in the 70s or early 80s, but he was struck by lightning, died, had a near death experience. Um, I think he's had a total of 2 or 3 near death experiences. Anyway, he was a veteran, and his big thing is, you know what? He goes, I want to start a program where we have volunteers who spend time with dying veterans so they don't die alone. and he was at the deathbed of so many veterans. I don't know if it's thousands or hundreds. It's a lot. And so I was like, you know what? I hear him talk about this all the time on Coast to Coast with Art Bell. I'm going to do something that's not easy. I mean, for me, it's something I wouldn't normally do, but I wanted to do something good, and it's not something I would normally do. So I forced myself to take the class, and one of his trainers I took in the Bronx. I went and took a 2 day, 3 day class with my friend Mike, and basically it was teaching you how to mostly listen, but it's 3 days of different exercises, and you're dealing with people who are dying. So also not to say the wrong thing. So I took that class, and that was summer of 2001. Fall September of 2011, I go to the Veterans Hospital in Northport, Long Island. I talked to the chaplain, and I talked to the chaplain, and I said, "Hey, I just took this class on volunteering. I want to spend time with the guys and girls in palliative care, basically 6 months or less to live, just to volunteer and just spend time with them because a lot of them don't have family members there." And he was like, "Yeah, that's fine. If you're just going to talk to them about whatever they want to talk to, that's fine." And then the first plane hit the tower it was 9/11. Long story short, had to evacuate the hospital, but I went back a week later, um, and started volunteering with them, probably like 3 days a week. And like I said, it's 6 months or less. It's just pain management, making them comfortable before they die. And this was not my first patient, but this is one I'll tell before I get back to the Yahoo stories. I have a few stories from this. So I walk into this one room one day. I had been there for a couple of months, and there's a new guy. I'm like, "How you doing?" He's like, "Not good." I'm like, "What's the matter?" He's like, I do not want to be here anymore. I just want to die." Now, he was lying in a bed, but there was nothing that I could see was wrong with him. I couldn't see. He was walking, moving. He was probably in his early 70s. He's just normal guy, but you knew he had limited time because that's the people who are in this unit, they have limited time. So, like he said, "I just want to die. I don't want to be here." And we talked a little bit, and then I left, and I'm like, well, I didn't know what to say. So I said, "I hope you get what you want, or I hope you get, you get your wish." And a couple of days later, it might have been the next day, I go in, he's gone, his bed is empty. I talk to the nurse. She's like, "Yeah, that night or last night, he was laying in bed. I was in his room. He looked up at the ceiling. He put both of his hands up like this, looked up at the ceiling, and then put his arms down, closed his eyes, and passed away." So he got what he wanted, and it happened really quick, a day or two. And like I said, if you looked at him, you're like, this guy's not gonna die anytime soon. So that was an interesting story. And I know nurses have so many stories like that. Let's see. Here's another story from the Yahoo article. About 2 minutes before my grandma passed, she had clarity. She suffered from severe dementia. Hold on one second. Let's see how much time we're 24 minutes in. All right. She suffered from severe dementia for years. She opened her eyes and said, "I found Jack." Jack was my grandpa who died 8 years prior. She said they were all at a ball. Sorry. She said they were all at a ball with their friends. Then she said, "I've got to go. He asks me to dance." Then she was gone. She died. Another one. My patient grabbed my arm, looked at me in the eyes, and said, "Please don't let me die. I have a daughter." Another one. My brother couldn't really talk while he was dying, but the look in his eyes before his death rattle will haunt me forever. And the death rattle is right before you die. There's this breathing that everybody does. And it's like, I don't know if I heard it at the hospital. There was one guy that got sick, and I was with him. I don't think, no, I was not with any of these guys when they passed, but I heard the death rattle, and it's this voice, this noise that comes in your throat when you're very close to dying. But the look in his eyes before his death rattle will haunt me forever. Whatever he saw, it awed him like a kid seeing Disneyland for the first time. I've never seen a person's eyes go so wide. My guess is he saw the whole damn universe at once. That's a great story, gives you very, very positive outlook on what we face when we die. Would have been nice to know exactly what he was seeing. Another one. I didn't mean to. We were sending this middle-aged guy home after his ER visit. As soon as we moved him off the bed, he went unresponsive and had no heartbeat. We did a couple of rounds of CPR and he began to come to. He blinked a couple of times, and the doctor running the code jokingly said, "Sir, you almost died on us." The man said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," in a sad way. His heart then stopped again and we couldn't get him back. And the person follows up by saying it was most likely a saddle pulmonary embolism. He was there for something pretty mild, but he threw a clot right when he was being transferred. If you want to look it up, he had a classic, and you could see that on the screen, cape cyanosis across his chest, which is indicative of a big PE. 18. This is the 18th story. I think that's 50. When I was 16, I was working in a nursing home. I befriended a man who talked about World War II and how he'd lost so many guys in his company. One day he had a stroke. When he returned from the hospital, he couldn't remember anyone, but he told me he wasn't doing good. He knew his time was coming to a close. He said it was time to pay for all of the horrible things he had done in Europe. He wasn't religious, but asked me where I thought he was going. I said to bed because it's lights out. He said, "No, Joe, my name's Mike. I mean up or down," meaning heaven or hell. I'm not a religious person, but I said, "That's not for me to say." He laughed and said, "I know where I'm going. There's only one place for people who have done what I've done. I've killed so many people, Joe. Most of the time, it didn't matter who it was. We went into buildings just shooting. There's only one place for me. It's what I deserve." Yeah, I don't think, first of all, I do think we survive death. I don't think it's a heaven or hell type of situation. And something that goes on in war is a little different than just blindly killing people. Of course, there are people who would disagree with me, but um, one guy confessed to me. This is number 19. One guy confessed to me that he was a Nazi war criminal. He didn't have dementia. He was with it, and I don't think he'd ever told anyone else. He was in his mid 90s. I saw he was German, saw his age, and asked if he served in the war, as I'm a former combat armed soldier. He said yes. So I told him that I was in the army myself when I was young and asked some questions about what he did. After a little while, he broke down and talked about his participation in killing Jews in Russia. He was a junior officer in a Wehrmacht unit. He knew he was dying. It all came out and he cried for a long time. "I'm nothing but a murderer." He died a day or so later. Those are some pretty heavy stories there. Um, I'm gonna go back to my stories at the hospital. So I think John was the first patient I met when I was in the hospital. This is the Northport Veterans Administration Hospital, Northport, Long Island, right after 9/11. So middle September, I started volunteering, and John was an old guy. And I have pictures of these guys. I didn't have time to get it for tonight, but I'll put them on Twitter. John, Bill, and Frank, three main patients. I spent about 9 months with each of them. A little less with some of them because they passed before the last guy passed, and I stopped volunteering. But John was in his 80s, really, really energetic, spunky. He had these like pulleys set up on his bed. He would exercise, couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair, and he would help. He's like, "Can you help me with these ropes? I want to reroute these ropes and do this." And if I didn't do it right, he would yell. He's like, "No, damn it, what the?" And he'd curse at me. It was kind of funny. Um, and I remember taking him outside in the courtyard one day, and just him being outside was a big deal to them. And all of these guys, because no matter what I had going on in my life at the time that would depress me. I'm like, these guys are dying, and if they're not depressed, then how can I be depressed? That's how it was when I was there. So really rewarding thing to do. Um, Towards the end, I had a trip scheduled. He was such a big gambler, which is not a good combination for me because I gamble too. Oh, before I forget, I forgot the story. Another patient who I'll get to in a second, Frank, he wanted to bet on the Super Bowl, but he had nobody to bet on it with. So I had an online sports book that I was betting with. So I made the bet for him, and I came in after the Super Bowl and I just gave him cash. He had not given me money up front, and I probably wouldn't have taken his money anyway. I probably wouldn't even told him I made the bet if it didn't win. The bet won though. I paid him like 30, 40 bucks. I'm like, here you go, Frank. I made a bet for you. He was so happy. Um, Back to John. He was big into horses, off track betting, OTB, and it's a big thing on Long Island. And he had an account, so he would call up and make bets on the phone. And I was like, let's go to the track. We have to go to the track one day. I think Belmont racetrack, thoroughbred. And everything was set. I had a friend come with me. We're going to put his wheelchair in the car. We're going to take him to the races. And then I get there and he's like, or I call him. I'm like, you ready? He's like, nah, my wheelchair had to get fixed today. And I don't think I'm going to go. And I was so disappointed. He didn't seem disappointed, but I was. And then I don't know how long after that, but he was eating breakfast one day. I was not there. I came in afterwards, but he was eating breakfast, turned his head, closed his eyes, and passed away. And I did go in his room right after it happened, and I just remember my reaction was he looked like a wax figure. It's like the person is not there anymore. And I know that's just how people look, but that's just my feeling, felt like a shell of a person. Um, his brother Jerry and his wife were the only ones who would visit him, and they were very appreciative. All the family members I encountered were very appreciative because a lot of them couldn't make it to visit. That's what I was there for, because these guys were all always by themselves. So if I was there, it's like at least I had somebody to talk to, and they talked to me about everything and anything. I mean, they didn't really talk about dying or being sick occasionally, but most of these guys are just didn't even want to talk about it. It's not like they were fearful. Only one was fearful, and I'll get to Frank in a second. But I had a family member afterwards say, "You need to be talking to Jesus with these folks because that's just not right. They're dying and they need to talk about Jesus." I'm like, I'm not there to talk about that. I'm there to talk about whatever they want to talk about. So if you want to judge me for that, fine. Um, I do remember sometime one day somebody came in and was talking to John, the older 80-year-old guy, about Christianity and the Bible, and I started debating the guy nicely, and John was enjoying the debate. It was funny. It was like a tennis match. The guy would say something about the Bible, I would say something back, and John was just sitting there going back and forth, back and forth. He's like, I am enjoying this. um, so, and then Frank had emphysema. He was the one he was Catholic, very Catholic. He always had the rosary tight in his hands. He was really afraid to die. And I would go in and talk to him for a little bit, but some days he would just be out of breath. He had emphysema, and he's like, "Not today. Don't want to talk." So we had some good days, some bad days. But once again, he was somebody. He never took a downturn. Bill, who's my last patient I'll talk to, he took a downturn. But everybody else I spoke with, there was never like a noticeable downturn. So go to visit Frank one day. I'm not sure if I talked to him that day or not. Either way, I had no inkling that he was getting worse or anything like that. Same every day, except some days he didn't want to talk because he was out of breath. Went home, had a clear dream that he died, went in the next day or the day after, and the nurse stops me and says, "Oh, I need to talk to you." I'm like, let me guess. Frank died. She's like, how do you know? I'm like, because I had a dream last night that he died. I had a dream last night that he died. I remember she was not that surprised because I'm sure, like I said, nurses who work in palliative care or hospice, they have that type of thing happen all the time. So yeah, why did I have that dream? Why did I have the dream back in 8th grade with Robin's mother dying? I don't know. But I did go into Frank's room afterwards and just to see his room one more time. And his bed was empty, but the bed next to him had a figure in it, like an outline of a person. And I was like, why is why didn't they take his body away? This is really weird. And all of a sudden, the covers who are, it's totally covering up the person. The covers come off, scares the heck out of me. And it's a person, A new patient had been brought into the room. And the guy's like, "Hello." I'm like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I don't remember the conversation. It was really brief. So that was Frank, and he was the one who I made the Super Bowl bet for. And like I said, he was very afraid of dying, and it seems like the religion was a big part of that. Um, I don't remember too much about our conversations. I do remember he used to drive into New York City from Long Island every day. It was like an hour and a half. If you know, it's the world's largest parking lot. Not as bad as LA, but it's pretty bad. That's like 3 hours each way every day. He did that for his entire career. And I was like, I remember thinking, what were you thinking? He's like, yeah, should have never done that. What a waste of time in the car. All right, back to thanks for being here, guys, and the chat. Hello, Red Panda Koala and Shelly and John and Heidi. I'm gonna go. Yeah, I have not personally experienced that. I was not there for anybody. Even when my mom passed, I was not there. It's like I spent all this time with people who are dying, but then when my mom passed, I think I went home, and then it happened right after me and my sisters had gone home. I didn't want to go in the room after she passed away either, and I didn't. I was like, I don't want that memory. I have my memories of her. I don't need that memory. And everybody's like, no, go ahead. She looks very peaceful. And I'm like, me, I don't want to personally. And then we talked to the doctor because I said once my father whispered in her ear to tell her it's okay. That night she died, and we talked to the doctor. He's like, I see it all the time. All the time, people can hold on for whatever reason, and then once they let go, they die. And let me get back to this Yahoo story, which is right there. I looked after a guy with end stage heart failure. He kept having episodes where if he coughed or leaned forward, did anything to increase his intrathoracic in, intrathoracic pressure, he would pass out. He'd come back there after a few minutes and gradually go from purple back to pink, asking, "How long was I out for that time?" He was fully fine mentally, sharp, witty, and at peace with what was going on, what was going to eventually happen to him. And he was fully fine mentally, sharp, witty, and at peace with what was going to eventually happen to him. He and I were joking that one of these episodes was going to kill him as he sipped his tea, talking rubbish. 5 minutes later, it happened again, and he didn't come back. 21. I used to install medical alarms, and one client, a nice, sweet lady, asked me to call her pastor because she wanted to tell him something. I called him, but he was over 2 hours away, and she said it wouldn't be right to do over the phone. She said, "Can I tell you then? My first husband would beat and rape me when he was drunk. So when he drank too much, I put his gun in his hand and shot him in the head." I had no idea what to say. So she thanked me, and said I was a good kid. Closed her eyes, closed her eyes and slumped over. Yeah, I don't know what do you say to that. But she got it off her chest. That's what she wanted to do. Shared the story and passed away. The quote, "Don't leave me alone." I really don't know what that is. 23. Physical therapist here. I treated a man in his 90s who was a do not resuscitate. I think DNIs do not intubate. So if the person flatlines, they do not, if they die, they do not try to bring them back. So this physical therapist was treating a man in his 90s who was a DNI. At least once a week, when I would go into his room to start our sessions, he would cry and say, "I didn't want to kill the kids." After speaking to his nurse, it was revealed that he had killed children in World War II. During a session, he collapsed and said, "The kids are here to get me." However, he wasn't displaying fear when he verbalized this after he collapsed. He seemed at peace and died a few minutes later. 24. I had a patient get diagnosed with a moderately aggressive but treatable throat cancer. We tried everything we could think of to get him to consider, but he refused any type of treatment. After 3 months, his wife had their 2 adult sons carrying him into the office at 4:50 PM on a Friday. I was the only nurse in the building and got him into the exam room. He was completely gray and gaunt. You could hear how close the end was every time he breathed. It wasn't exactly a death rattle, but you just knew his lungs were full of fluid. His sons sit him in a chair, and he kept sliding out. I stood between his legs and held him upright in the chair while I told the sons to go get the doctor and told the wife to call 911. We all knew nothing was going to keep this man alive much longer. He patted the side of my leg. It was the most he could move, and whispered, I should have listened to you all. I don't want to die. Bad story. Hopefully we'll have some more uplifting. I don't remember. I did read all these. I don't remember every one of them. Um, this is you always hear about people who are in love. They die within days of each other because the one dies and the other one can't go on without them. This is 25. My grandparents passed 3 days apart from each other. My grandmother was diagnosed with lung cancer. Halfway through her treatment, she told us she felt that her life was fulfilled and she was stopping treatment to pass peacefully. Stopping treatment to pass peacefully. She was on her deathbed for a long time, in and out of consciousness, but not communicating often and only eating ice chips. It tore my grandfather up. He was healthy and in impeccable shape. He went to the gym until he was 90. My grandfather was driving until he was 92. One day he was at the grocery store and had a heart attack. He died within minutes. A few days later, my dad and I were sitting with my grandmother. Now, from what I get, they had not told the grandmother yet that the dad had passed, I think. But it says a few days later, my dad and I were sitting with my grandmother in the hospital. My dad told her that my grandfather was waiting for her whenever she was ready so she wouldn't have to go alone. My grandmother spoke her first words in a week. He's right here with me. I see him. My dad asked, what's he's wearing? She giggled. He's in my favorite gray suit. I think we're going out. She passed that evening. So, another story of seeing a dead relative at the bedside of people who are about to pass. And I would love to think it's really what it says it is. I don't know if it is. I don't think it's just an hallucination. There are too many stories like that. There are stories of people seeing. There's a book called Phantasms of the Living. I think it was written in the 1800s. It's just story after story after story. I think it's the Society for Psychical Research out of the UK of people seeing people who have died. Not always, it's not always somebody who have died, but they would see somebody, and then back then there was no communication like the internet or phone, so it's like they wouldn't find out the person died until weeks later. So it's like, how did they know? They saw that person at the moment they died. Somehow they showed up in the room. So it's like, I saw you, I saw that person at the moment, within minutes of when they were pronounced dead, and they found out weeks later they had died. So how does that happen? It's that's like I said, it's over and over and over and over again. 26. We had a patient with a history of IV drug use who'd been in the unit for over a month. She'd gotten sober months prior, but developed endocarditis, which is a swelling of the heart, I believe. She was quiet, sweet, and reserved, but always thankful for her care. She had no social support. Her mother was the one who gave her drugs the first time. She had no contact with anyone in her life except one friend who came in weekly to check on her. Her 24th birthday, we got her a cupcake and little presents, hung a banner in her room, and sang her happy birthday. She said thank you, but didn't show much emotion. We weren't entirely sure how she felt. That day, she went into cardiac arrest and died. We spent 45 minutes trying to get her back. Her friend came in to collect her things and showed us the message she had sent that day. It was a picture of the cupcake, presents, and a banner, and said, I love my nurses. I don't know how to tell them, but they're the best family I've ever had, which I'm sure made the nurses feel great. One of the patients who I have not gotten to yet, I will get to now, was Bill. His family afterwards were like so appreciative that I had spent time with Bill because they didn't really have time to see him all the times. There were some people. There were like Frank never had a visitor. I think his sister came once. So it's like the guy's dying. It's like, was he that bad of a person that nobody in his life came to visit him? It's really sad. Um, There were other people like that too. I remember one older lady. Nobody. I don't think I ever saw anybody visit her. The nurses were with her all the time. So Bill had throat cancer. I guess the tumor was up against his vocal cords, so he talked like this. Hey, thanks for coming to see me. That's how he talked. Talked a lot too. We talked about everything. And at one point, that tumor must have shrunk because I went in one day and he started talking normal. I was like, "What the hell?" It's like, "Your voice is back." He's like, "Yeah, I don't know what happened." Um, Somebody had brought in his guitar and he sang a song for my friend Carol. Carol is the one who trained me in the Danny and Brinkley class. She's the one who trained me. She was with me a couple of times. She came to the hospital and he sang Kalijah, which I think Hank Williams Jr. maybe. Um, Interesting. Carol started doing healing sessions on him one day, and Bill was worried that if he started getting better, they would throw him out of palliative care because palliative care is not to get you better. Palliative care is to reduce pain, make you comfortable, and get you ready to die, basically. Um, so that's how it is with some people. He did not. I don't know if there was a psychological thing where he didn't want to get better, but he was worried about getting thrown out, so she stopped doing the healing. Like I said, his family and John's family, the old 80-something-year-old guy, they were so happy that I was able to spend time with them. I think that's it as far as my stories. Yeah. Back to Yahoo. All right. While in hospice, this is 27. While in hospice, my grandma said to me, there are a great many things in this world worse than dying. And then she talked about how lucky she was to have lived the life she did. I had never looked at death like that before, and that conversation truly changed me and my outlook. She was the most wonderful person. My great uncle's last words before he passed were, "It is what it is." I know it's really common, but I find myself saying it quite a lot nowadays. It is what it is. My brother was with a friend of his when the friend had a massive heart attack. While waiting for an ambulance, the guy suddenly shouted, "Oh, it's coming," then looked at my brother dead in the eye and said, "It was nice to know you." He died less than 30 seconds later. Somehow we know. When my great uncle was on his deathbed, he asked the nurse, "Hey, can you do me a favor and go get my car keys? I'm ready to go." The nurse went to get the keys and he died before she got back with them. Like I said, we'll know and they can kind of decide when. I don't think everybody can just do that, but it seems like a lot of people can. 31. There was an elderly gentleman who'd come from an at home hospice with stage 4 cancer. During moments of lucidity, he expressed guilt over the pain he was causing his loved ones. He never once complained of pain and denied pain medication because someone else would need it. On his last night, he said, "I want this to be my final lesson to my family. I want to show them how to die with dignity." Moments later, he asked if I could tell him it was okay to die, to find peace and rest. He said he couldn't bear the thought of his family seeing him die. He wanted to hold on because he was their support system, but his pain was too much. He was ready. I told him he didn't need to keep fighting for his family's comfort. If he was truly in pain and ready to go, it'd be okay to die. His family would understand. Once I gave him the okay, he started the process. Delirium, heavy breathing, fidgeting, and then death rattle. Then he was gone. Another case of people being told it's okay and then going. Give me 1 second. Sorry, my dog goes through these reverse sneezing and it sounds like he's going to die. He can't breathe. So, not something you want to hear when you're talking about death. My mom's My mom, this is 32. My mom told me that my grandma's last words were, "You want to hear a joke?" And then a long beep was the only noise that filled the room. In other words, she flatlined. Don't know if the grandmother was trying to make that her joke. 33. I worked as a nurse's aide in a nursing home. A gentleman in hospice was assigned to my caseload, and one night he seemed off. I explained what I was doing to care for him, but he sounded so angry and confused. I was new, so I didn't know what to do and pressed on. He got so freaked out that he took his oxygen tube and tried to wrap it around my throat and strangle me. I got away, told the nurse, and was told that confusion and aggression were common when people were dying. Regardless, he needed his care. I went to him a few hours later, and he looked so docile and defeated. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at me and said, "I'm really sorry for what I did earlier, ma'am. That's not who I am. I'm so sorry." I told him it was okay and that I just wanted to make him comfortable. He thanked me and said, "I'm going home." He kept repeating it and sounded so urgent. I thought he was still confused. He passed away 1.5 hours later. Another sign that he knew it was coming. And the skeptic will say, "How many people say they know it's coming and don't die?" Well, yeah, I don't have stats on it, so these are just anecdotes. Take them for what they are. 34. I'm going to die. I know I'm going to die. He was going for very routine, fairly minor surgery. I held his hand and told him he would be fine. He died shortly after the procedure. I mean, I had my gallbladder out, and of course, when you go under anesthesia, you never know. Stuff can happen, complications. Um, I don't know if my friend is still listening, but he's about to undergo some major heart surgery. But this is just, these are stories. There are obviously thousands, I don't know how many of surgeries per day where people are fine. These are the ones obviously that made it into this article. So it's kind of a specific, I forget the word is, skewed. It's kind of a skewed narrative here. Obviously the stories that made it in here are going to be a little out of the ordinary. I do think this stuff happens all the time, but overall, this doesn't happen when people go into the hospital on average, obviously, because people have surgeries all the time. 35. I heard my patient talking to herself, so I went in to check on her. She said she was talking to her deceased husband and asked, "You don't see him? He's sitting in the chair." That sent a chill down my spine. And then she coded a few minutes later. So she died after seeing her deceased husband in the room. Oh, I do have another story. A friend of mine, he had surgery, heart surgery, told me afterwards that right before they put him under, he saw some guy in a top hat in the room, clear as day. Nobody else saw him. He gave him the thumbs up, and then he had his surgery and he was fine. Next time he had surgery, he didn't make it. I don't know if he saw anything the second time. I didn't get to speak with him. 36. You know what's funny? Everyone says living is the hard part. No, dying is much harder than living. A cancer patient in their 40s who was incredibly active and athletic up until their diagnosis said this to me as a student in my hospice clinical. It stuck with me ever since. Yeah, I, I saw it with my mom in cancer. She had other problems too, but yeah, that's not a battle, not an easy way to go. 37. I worked in a nursing home, and a lot of the people who were dying saw their spouses who had passed before them. One lovely old lady once said, this probably is my favorite story, and it makes me wonder um, about the true identity of people who show up in the. And I know people don't want to hear this, but here's the story. I worked in a nursing home. This is 37. I worked in a nursing home, and a lot of the people who were dying saw their spouses who had passed before them. One lovely old lady once said her husband was in the room. When I told her it was okay to go with him, she said, "Oh my God, no, I hate him. I'm scared of him." She then started to cry. All I could do was hold her hand and tell her I would send him away. She passed very shortly after that with a smile on her face. I hope he wasn't there for her. So that makes you wonder. It's like putting aside the hallucination. theory that I'm sure skeptics would say, you know, if it really was her husband who she hated, why would he show up at her deathbed? If it's what it looks like, that's why I'm like, was it really her husband? You know, or was it something pretending to be her husband? So when she died, this whatever could take her to wherever it wanted her to go, and then we start getting into the old theory that the Farsight Institute remote viewing says, you know, we go to death traps, they wipe our memories, and then they force us to reincarnate back on this planet. And I know folks who are into new age topics hate me when I talk about that. Um, it's viewing data that has not been confirmed, and I don't know how you could ever confirm that. But I have read other books where they said when you die and you see the light, don't go towards the light because it's a trick. Um, so and then you have that one of the Gnostic texts that talks about how Jesus's brother James the Just, he had the pay. I think Jesus told him the passwords he needed to get by. The archons, the mighty archons that guard the afterlife. So you can't get to the afterlife unless you know the passwords. Obviously, that's symbolic of something. I don't know what it is. Somebody said maybe it's, you have to achieve a certain state of awareness, meditation. Those are the passwords to get you through. I don't know. But that story made me think a lot about some of the conspiracy theories about death, and I've heard other people who are very respectable people talk about reincarnation and how it may not be exactly what it appears to be in a negative sense. And I do think there's evidence very consistent with what you would expect if reincarnation was real. Whether reincarnation is real, I don't know. Over 4,000 cases that Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia, the children's cases of reincarnation, some of them are so amazing. They're consistent with what you would expect if reincarnation was real. That doesn't prove reincarnation is real. As my grandfather said, when I said, "Grandpa, you believe in reincarnation?" He's like, "I'll know when I get there." 38. When my sister was on her deathbed, she would point out and ask who the people were in her room, but no one else was there. I'd then see her having conversations with these invisible people. I finally asked her what she was talking about and with whom. She said she was talking to our grandfather who had died 20 years prior, and that he told her he was there to help her cross over. So, and I talked about this earlier today with somebody. So her grandfather was there to help her cross over. You hear that all the time. Is it really that difficult to cross over that we need somebody to help us cross over? It's like when you die, there should be a sign that says this way to cross over. So it's really, to me, that's really odd to take it on face value. Somebody's there to help us. Otherwise, if not, we're going to be stuck and we're going to get lost and we're going to go to the wrong place. I don't know. But you hear that a lot. They were there to help them cross over to the other side. But she told her grandfather, "I'm sorry, I'm not ready to go." And he said, "Well, that's your decision. When you're ready to take my hand, I will guide you across." Well, what if he's busy that day? He's not going to know how to cross over? You would think that's something instinctual. Apparently not. I'm obviously being a little lighthearted here, but it just doesn't make sense to me. 39. My great grandmother got sick when she was about 94. She had a flu and a really bad fever. I remember her crying and yelling the name Fritz. I can see Fritz. I can see Fritz. Fritz was her brother who passed away when he was 5, almost a century beforehand. 40. 10 more left. One night I was giving an elderly lady who was pleasantly confused a bath, and I asked her how she was doing. She goes, "I'm a DNR, baby. I'm doing just fine." She passed 30 minutes later. DNRs do not resuscitate. 41. I'm only 18. Give me 1 second. Thank you, PJ Mike, for the donation. I forgot to look at the chat. Um, I don't want to. I know this is not the best things to say. These stories. These are what people report. So, like I said, I am fairly confident there is something after this life. What exactly it is, how we transition, I don't know. Uh, is it connected to the world of UFOs and the phenomenon? I think so. How? I don't know. And Bug says, if I saw the light, it would be so tempting to head towards the light. Of course. I mean, you hear that all the time. People who have near death experiences, they're like to see this beautiful light. But then they're like, you know what? I'm not ready to go. And then you hear stories, people who have had close encounters and they have this wonderful feeling of love. And some of them are like, or fear, an incredible amount of fear that is much more than you would expect in the situation. So it's almost like I'm really going off on a tangent here, but it's like this intelligence can create a fake emotion in us. So it's I know it's very cynical, but how do we trust anything? And I've said this before with our experiences, if it can manipulate our emotions and our perceptions. So I don't know how the hell we figure that out. Maybe one day we'll have classes on it. Yeah, I mean, I am by far not an expert, not even close on Gnosticism one day. Yeah, I mean, on Gnosticism. So, um, I should try to find a really smart guest about Gnosticism and have them on because I would bore you with my lack of knowledge. I'm only 18. That shit never leaves you. She had skin cancer all over from a childhood event. Her cousin had pushed her into boiling water and she eventually couldn't even roll over without writhing in pain. It was the worst experience. It was the worst experience of my life. This person said I shortly left inpatient nursing after that. Like I said, some of these stories I wouldn't have included, but I guess whoever made this Yahoo article said, "Oh, I'm just going to include everything," because it's not really about dying. It's just a horrible, horrible event. My spouse's grandfather passed away last autumn. He was a biologist and loved nature. Before he had passed away, he had explained he had seen another dimension and how all life was connected. He told his children that he wished they would meet again as molecules in a flower. I thought these things were beautiful and reflected well on his life as someone who dedicated his time to learning about nature and its wonders. Sounds like somebody in our circle. He had the most amazing life and passed away so peacefully. Was a well-deserved end for a man as good as he was. So there are lots of good stories about people passing away. 43. A family friend had a very young niece who was dying from cancer. Her parents were there to comfort her in the final hours, and one of the last things she asked was, "How do I die?" Um, there may be something we can do to prepare for the afterlife. Assuming there's an afterlife, and I do think there is. There may be exercises we can do, and you know, maybe one day when people are less afraid to speak about it, we can have discussions in classes on what to expect. Robert Bigelow talks about it. That's why he has that part of Bix, the consciousness aspect, more important than UFOs because we're all going there. So if there's something we can do to prepare for it, we should learn about it. But it's something most people don't want to talk about. 44, and basically in this other one, it was a very young niece asking, "How do I die?" I mean, how do you answer that? Right now, our answer would be, "We don't know." We don't know. We don't. There's the Book of the Dead. I don't know about the Book of the Dead. I can't quote the Book of the Dead, but there are certain things that we're supposed to do. Obviously, that might be outdated for the time and knowledge they had back then, um, even though they may have known a lot more about certain things than we do now. But number 44, when my grandpa was dying, he was in full blown sundowners. He wasn't coherent, couldn't really speak except in the early mornings, and was hallucinating all sorts of things like dead family members. Most of his communication was just paranoia about the nurses trying to kill him. I was a young teen, so my mom didn't really want me to be around him when he was like this. The last time I saw him, something clicked on in his head. It's like he fought through the cloud of unreality in his head, made direct eye contact with me, and grabbed my hand. And he said, "Determination, that's what's important." And that's all he said. But it was like he knew it was the last time he would see me. It was like someone said, "All right, you've got 4 words, make them count." Immediately after that, he went back to a semi vegetative state and reverted to mumbling. He died not long after that, and those words have pulled me through some of my toughest days. And remember, the 4 words were determination, that's what's important. And closes with, "It was like the last lesson he had for me, and he had to tell me this. It took me a long time to really understand those words, but I faked it until I made it. Thanks, Grandpa, you were the best." 45. I'm a hospice chaplain and worked in a hospital for a time. Hold on, I'm gonna tell a quick story about my ex-wife who went out to take the dog, and I can talk more freely. So when I met her, she was part of my newsletter I had back in 2001. I'd started a little earlier, Open My News. I covered paranormal, UFOs, life after death, reincarnation, everything. Um, Third party politics, I was covering at the time, interviewed a couple of people, Ralph Nader, John Hagelin, who were they were both candidates for president, I think in 2000, the whole Gore Bush debacle in Florida. Interviewed them about UFOs. Nader's response was FOIA. Hagelin talked about quantum mechanics. So one of the readers of my newsletter was this girl in Queens. She wrote me and she said, "Hey, my husband just passed away. Do you know of any sites that help people deal with bereavement?" So I said, "Yeah, here's some stuff." And next thing you know, I was in Long Island, and I said, "We should get together." She's like, "Yeah, I'm going back to Spain. He just died. I don't really want to be here. It's kind of hard for me to be here now. Too many memories." I said, "Before you go back to Spain, we should meet." So we met, and long story short, we wound up getting married. We were married for 17 years. Um, anyway, her husband, she met him in New York. They got married in Las Vegas on vacation, went back to New York, living there. He goes to work on a job constructing a bar inside of a casino in Las Vegas. Goes up to this ledge. I'll make this very short, where they were bringing equipment up from one level to the next level. And so the rope was like, would use this rope. Anyway, he put the rope around his neck. He was with somebody at the time, slipped off the ledge or jumped off and died instantly, hung himself. And this was on the job site. And he had no idea, she had no idea if it was on purpose or not, if it was an accident. I actually hired a medium for her, Lori Williams, who was a famous medium, and to see if anything like that came out information wise, was it on purpose? Was it an accident? But that detail did not come out in that reading. Turns out, so we wound up moving to Las Vegas, and to make a very long story short, if I would take this laptop and point it out the back, you could see the casino across the street. That's where it happened. It happened in that casino. That's where we wound up. So it's a really um, odd coincidence, and people could say, "Well, you purposely moved there." No, we love this area, and we moved here because we love the area. We did go to the restaurant bar where it happened, just to say, this is where it happened. There used to be a plaque up that was a memorial for him, but it was taken down. I had played blackjack there, and I spoke to one of the dealers, and they were like, "Yeah, I remember when that happened. I was here." So a really odd story. And yeah, as far as I know, like with my mom, people talk about having contact with her late husband. Neither one of us had contact in dreams or anything like that. I had one dream about my mom. I remember it was so disturbing. I'm like, there's no way. I hope this is not my mom communicating, because it was a really disturbing dream. So here's number 45. I'm a hospice chaplain, and worked in a hospital for a time. There was a spiritual, non-religious man I had a good connection with. He requested that I come to his room. When I did, he motioned for me to crouch by his bed and spoke in a whisper. Do you see my brother in the corner? I told him I didn't, but believed he was seeing him. He was completely lucid and calmly explained that his brother had been in the corner talking with him, hashing things out and coming to forgiveness like they weren't able to do before his brother died. He worried the nurses would think he was crazy and try to medicate him. When I assured him I believed him and just wanted to listen to what he had to say, he went on. I see death too. She was in the parking lot. I could see her from my window. She had my brother with him. Now she's in the room. She's all black, but she ain't ugly. He was totally at peace. He died a few days later. What was he seeing? That's interesting. I don't really hear that too many times. He claimed to be seeing death as a female, all black figure. 46. I do know my father's possibly last words. I wasn't there, but he called me and left me a long voicemail. It was the middle of the night, so I was passed out. It all boiled down to him apologizing for a fight we had months before, after which he didn't talk for a while. The final words I have recorded before he hung up were, and I quote, I hope you don't blame yourself for what is going to happen, but I think this is the end for me. I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you one last time. He committed suicide within an hour of that voicemail, according to the coroner's report. I was only 17 at the time. When I woke up the next morning, it was too late to call him back. It may not be haunting to most, but it does haunt me to this day, and I still blame myself because I could tell from his voice that the fight was still weighing on him. The fight she's talking about is a fight they had months before he committed suicide. I doubt that's what, you know, she says it was weighing on him with their relationship, but I doubt that was why he it had anything to do with him committing suicide. Um, I don't know the whole story. 47. My grandmother said, "Let's get this over with," right before she passed on. Yeah, it's like, all right, this is gonna happen. Make it quick. I got things to do in the afterlife. It may be a matter of closing your eyes in this world and opening your eyes in a parallel world. It may be that may be what happens. I don't know. 48. I work in a nursing home, and one that sticks out for me was, my kids left me here to die. May that not happen to you, son. Yeah, you hear stories of, like I said, some of the people I volunteered with, they had nobody come visit with them. It's like, you put your relative, they're in the hospital and you don't visit them. I mean, some people live out of state, so it's difficult, but that wasn't the case for a lot of these people. Just for whatever reason, their family members would not make time to visit them. So kind of sad. 49. I had a lady tell me in her confused state that her husband disappeared after years of domestic violence. I didn't understand what she meant, so I expressed my condolences and asked where she think he went. All she said was, underground. I didn't ask any more questions after that and never did see her again. Apparently, she passed shortly after. But did she have him killed? Weird story. 50. My grandfather told me he killed my mom's first husband with a bat at his apartment, rolled him up in a carpet, and dumped him in a dumpster. Since they all used to hang out in a big group in high school, I asked my dad what happened to Bob. And my dad told me after my mom left him, he just disappeared. Not really sure what that has to do with life after death, but they included it. Almost done. Yep, this is the last one. I'm an ER doctor. An old lady had a big heart attack and refused treatment, so we made her comfortable by giving her morphine and benzos for her shortness of breath. While she was in the process of dying, I was with her. While she was in the process of dying, I was with her and the family providing comfort. Her daughter said to her, "Just let go, Mom." The old lady opened her eyes one last time, looked at her daughter, and said, "What do you think I've been trying to do?" Passed away a short time later. It's like, hello, That's what I'm trying to do here. Leave me alone so I can focus on dying. So, like I said, some of these are comedic, um, and I know some of those are kind of not exactly what people are expecting. But if you have any questions, how long? An hour and 15. All right, not too bad. I've been averaging 2 hours, and I know for some people that's way too long, and for other people, the longer the better. I have not read Mishalov's essay yet, Dan. I haven't read any of that. I need to make time. There's so much stuff going on. Trying to keep the blog going, and trying to keep my Twitter interesting that I need to take time. I started reading it, I got distracted, and I didn't go back, which is the story of my life. Mishalov's essay was a heavy read, lots of videos. Yeah, a lot of videos, which I love in the beginning. I never got all the way through. Shelley says, this is why you should not ghost hunt, because those who get stirred up with those who are just trying to get a message through. I've done ghost hunting before, just piggybacking on other people. I went to the Queen Mary in Long Beach, and we actually saw something. There was a ghost hunting group there, and they shot some video, and they're like, "Look, we just captured it." And it was almost total darkness where we were in the bowels of the ship, near where a swimming pool used to be. And she played the video back, and it was like a ball of light. It just popped on, traveled like that, went up, and then blinked out. So it was, to me, it wasn't dust. It was in the middle of this darkness. It was pretty cool, whatever it was. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know medical stuff, but any more questions? Tomorrow I'm doing an interview with Calling All Beings, so that should be fun. They have multiple people interviewing me, so if I get tongue-tied or at a loss for words, they can chime in, which is always good. And I have multiple transcripts in the works. I think 4 of them. I have 4 or 5, maybe 6 I have to post. Just finished Eric Weinstein and Hal Puthoff, and that was tough because there was a lot of science talk that was over my head. Can you recap the most important Twitter items for the past week? Not on Twitter. PJ, you gotta get on Twitter. Because, like I said, follow me. Hopefully I wasn't muted then. I promise I got to do a weekly Twitter update for people like PJ and Mike, because I don't want to do it now because it's almost an hour and a half. Tomorrow I'm doing that interview. All right, I promise, PJ, in the next few days I will do something. Yeah, somebody made a Dumb and Dumber picture with Stephen Greenstreet and John Greenwald, it was funny. I've had people, and people are like, it's offensive. Nobody said that. It's funny. I don't have it right here, but I remember somebody made a picture of me with a wig and a dress, all different color wigs, and people are like, he's gonna get upset. I'm like, that was funny. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't have any any negative experiences in any places I've gone ghost hunting. It's not like I really make a habit of it, but I went to a place in New Orleans where there was a group of people and you paid to go in, and it was an alleged haunted house with no power, and there were people who were in the group ahead of us screaming when they were upstairs, oh my god, do you see it, and we went upstairs, experienced absolutely nothing, which is not abnormal. So the only thing I will say, when I did the Ouija board back in 91, 90, I'm trying to think, 92, something like that, I did not feel good afterwards, so I stopped doing that. And I know there are some people who are like, that's opening a door and inviting things in. So didn't like it, stopped it, and I will probably, most likely, most definitely not do that again. And You're welcome. UIP. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think that's all the anecdotes I had for my personal stuff. But I will promise, Mike, in the next couple of days, I will just sit and go through. I'll just go through my Twitter. I will go 1 week back. Um, Hopefully not more than 2 hours. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? It'll be there tomorrow or tonight. I don't know how. You know, I know what I need to do when I have transcripts from Semivan, Lou, Weinstein, Put Off, another Lou one from the summer. I need to summarize those when I come on here. To read it word for word is too boring. It's too boring. It's too long. Um, but Twitter, I can go over tweets and I can expand on what I was trying to tweet because it's limited. I'm trying to think. Yeah, one of the things I pulled up from the summer where I had a source that said Eric Davis was in charge of the crash retrieval portfolio, which is a big deal. Um, no doubt about that. What exactly does that mean? I don't know. I can't get details. I can't ask him about details related to the crash retrieval program. What he said publicly, I think he's already pushing it as far as he can. You listen to what Lou can say, and I'm interviewing Lou on the 4th of March. Lou only goes so far. Davis goes a lot further than anybody goes, and he has chased down that crash retrieval story for at least 2002 when he met Admiral Wilson and interviewed him. So 20 years. So he knows a lot. Thanks, Jeff. And I gotta make an effort because I promised PJ that I would go over my tweets, and that's something I do want to do because I know there are people on YouTube. It's a totally different crowd because I don't think a lot of the Twitter folks will follow me. Some do. Obviously, I know some of the names, but there are a lot of Twitter folks that are like, you've already heard Joe tweet, saw his blog, don't need to hear him on YouTube. So the YouTube crowd is different. I am not consistent. If I do something the same day every day, I will get a bigger audience. I realize that, but I'm not sure. I also spent a ton of time on the blog. I mean, every day when I'm doing transcripts, it's like it takes so much time because I don't just transcribe. I link to it. I make sure it's accurate as far as grammar and everything, spelling. The software I use is not perfect. It's good. I mean, Otter is really good, but it's better with some people than others. Some people who speak clear and slow, it's great. But then other people speak like Put Off. It struggled with Put Off. I did not like the way that Eric Weinstein handled Put Off in that, he's like, oh, you don't come off very, you've come off with very cogent before. And now I don't know. It's like, I think Hal got frustrated because Hal was talking about how they made money in the Silvers futures by using associative remote viewing. Um, and Eric Weinstein is like, well, why didn't you keep doing it? And Hal's like, well, I had other things going on and that just took up so much time. And he's like, Hal's like, I could tell you how to do it. You could do it yourself and you could prove it to yourself that it works. You could see Hal was getting a little annoyed because a lot of people who are skeptical of remote viewing have never tried it. So it's like, you really need to try it for yourself. I was able to do it and come up with little details that I should not have been able to come up with, but I am not a good natural psychic. There are people that come up with amazing details. I'm not one, but I did come up with some details during my remote viewing. Like, you see a neighborhood with 3 houses, and on the top of one of the houses is a weather vane. It's pretty prominent in the picture. And in my remote viewing, I drew a weather vane and I wrote weather vane pointing it to it. That's not great, but it was something. And there were other ones where I wrote down bright yellow, bright green, or bright yellow, bright blue, and it was the front of a house in Europe. And it was so obvious. The garage was painted bright blue and bright yellow. It matched exactly what I said. It's like those just pop into your head. You write them down, and it wasn't just yellow and blue. It was bright yellow, bright blue, and they were bright. So little things like that show me that yes, somehow you're contacting that target, accessing the data somehow with your sixth sense. Pounds team, I'll bring it up to Lou. I mean, I heard Michael, who I interviewed, who was healed of being blind, and maybe there may be people skeptical of that. I'm not one of them. I've spoken to him and his wife numerous times. but he's the first one I heard mention Pounce Team. Supposedly, as a group that if there's a crash retrieval, they jump in and make sure everything is cleaned up and nobody sees it. What do I know about remote viewing? I studied back in, I think it was 97. I took a class with Lynn Buchanan, who was one of the original Army remote viewers. So it was a 3-day basic class, controlled remote viewing. Read lots of books on it. Courtney Brown lecture on remote viewing was the first one I attended. Bought his book, Cosmic Voyage, which I do not recommend. McMonagle's books are great. Mind Trek, which you can find online in a PDF. A lot of those books, if you type in the name of a book in a PDF, a lot of times they're online in a Google in a PDF. Because I have the book in physical form, but I also want the PDF and I don't want to buy it again. So I don't feel guilty about that. Does remote viewing open you up to exterior influences? Well, I didn't do it enough to have any experiences, but Joe McMonagle said in his 10th year of remote viewing, he started seeing things out of the corner of his eye that when he would look up, they would disappear. Eventually, they wouldn't disappear, and he would be able to look at them like shadow creatures. No, they never hurt him or anything. He saw a foot-high little, that's something I put on Twitter, a foot-high little lizard running in his house where the cat went to chase it, and it was growling at it. Seems like it's like the guy I'm listening to lately, Paul Eno, his theory is it's a multiverse and all of these worlds are bleeding into our world like bubbles connecting in a sink. They bleed in, they pop. So we're experiencing, at times we're experiencing these other realities. As far as any negative influences, I've heard people who are psychologically unstable have issues. They had something like that happen in the program, but most of the guys you talk to, they really haven't. I mean, Lynn Buchanan would speak about when he would do a session on Saddam Hussein when he was in the army, they would do something where it's like a brain or mind scan. And you have a monitor sitting across the table from you when you're remote viewing. That's what they were doing in the military. If you ever see the ones right now, some of the modern day remote viewers don't use a monitor, but in the military, so they have somebody sitting across from them, and this one lady was monitoring Lynn Buchanan, and basically, the monitor doesn't know the target either. So the monitor says, give me sounds, smells, tastes. Go 1,000 feet above the target and describe what you see. And he was doing a session. He looked up, and the monitor had turned white. So what happened this is what Lynn said happened during his remote viewing of Saddam Hussein. His blue eyes had turned brown, which matched Saddam Hussein's brown eyes. And Lynn's like, you kind of start taking on the person you're melding with, which is obviously not a good thing if it's Saddam Hussein. But that's, he goes, I needed to detox a little bit after that. And there are people who are not going to believe that story, but that's the story he told. And he said it freaked out the monitor. And the dog is freaking out. What are you doing? Yeah, Joe McMonagle saw a Native American in his house, a house he was staying at a friend, and the friend's like, "Oh yeah, he just visits." It's kind of like the guy was bilocating, and Joe McMonagle was able to see him in his other body, and he described him accurately. So yeah, but that was 10 years of remote viewing that opened him up to seeing things that most people don't see. Pix has entered the building. Good evening. Do I have a checklist of topics you really want to bring up with Lou? Yeah, I'm going to have a whole list, and I'll have too many questions. I may ask him things he's been asked before, but ask it in a different way and just expand upon certain things. I'm sure I will run out of time with him. I have 75 minutes, I believe, with him. So I'm not going to give away my questions, but you can imagine. I mean, people are like, ask about Wilson Davis. Well, he's been asked about that, and he's like, I never spoke to Eric about it. I can ask hypotheticals. Does it seem logical to you that Admiral Wilson would be upset that he wasn't given access to a special access program that he wasn't read into? Should he have? Does that sound right? because that's a question a lot of people have. It's like, but he was, he was in charge of intelligence. So, and it was another reason, maybe funding wise, they were connected to that program through the Joint Chiefs, but in the DoD. But he would not get into that with Eric. Why he felt they had oversight, I'm not sure if I'll ask that, because, like I said, no doubt the Admiral Wilson interview took place, but there are other questions I can ask about, and I know I need to ask hypotheticals on certain things. Yeah, definitely details, but I'm not gonna demand he go anywhere because people are like, you got to push him, and I don't need to push. I can ask various questions in different ways. Where did Semivan expand on his experience? Yeah, he was interviewed by, what's the name? The Experiencer Group. I'm going to start working on that one tomorrow. So it was an interview by Stuart Davis in the Experiencer Group. So their Twitter is at For Experiencers, FOR Experiencers. But so that's where that interview was with Semivan, and he talked about it more in depth. Said it looked like the Michelin Man, but it was all black with or dark armor, skinnier, not like a fat Michelin Man. So that type of thing with dark armor. And Colin Kelleher immediately knew what type of being it was. I forget the name. I have it written down. He goes, oh, those are the Benendis or something like that. So obviously Colin Kelleher had heard that type of being experience before. He's like, it wasn't a gray. He goes, although there may have been a gray there present or a mantis, I couldn't tell. There was something over my shoulder I couldn't see. When am I meeting with Davis? Well, Davis is in Alabama, so I was planning a trip in that area, but it didn't happen. If I go meet him, I will have to continue and drive down to Florida and see Will Miller again. It's been a long time. Do I have access to what Jesse Michaels edited out? Oh, I didn't know he edited anything out. He says he didn't edit anything out. So no, I don't even know Jesse. You're welcome, Bug. Stuart Davis did a great job in interview. Yeah, he's really good. And the guy who's part of who I've interviewed is J. Christopher King, and he's going to be part of Sean's interview, Witness Citizen of Lou. So he's an experiencer. So really curious where Jay can take that if it goes in a different direction. But Lou's not going to talk about abductions, I don't think. Although now that Semivan has spoken up, you can go there. Lou has kind of said in the one episode of Unidentified, he's like, we don't know if it's a physical thing happening, but Semivan's like, I know what lucid dreaming is. I was not in a hypnagogic state. This was real. So that's something that could be brought up. What do I think about Lucassi's claims about Elizondo? What claims though? I don't know what claims you're talking about. Yeah. That he worked in a small unofficial office. Yeah, well, I think Lou will admit that too. It wasn't official. It was something they did in their spare time. They had more than one job. They had ATIP in their other job. So that's not really a revelation. The only question is, Lou says they had funding. Lukaski said they didn't have funding. So we'll see if Lou talks about that in the book. I would like to know. I want to know every aspect. So I want to know where their funding was, how much funding they had. Sure, you could blow 75 minutes asking Lou questions. That would all be. I can't comment. A couple of I can't comments are okay because maybe there's something there. Lou would be fine with this too, since he always says you can't ask him anything. I'll ask questions in a way he'll be able to answer. It'll be a lot of hypotheticals. If you were in charge and this happened, how would you solve this type of things? Yeah, exactly. It's the way you can ask a question. I've seen him ask interviewers, ask me differently, and then the person doesn't get it and Lou does it himself. I can't wait to see his book. Yeah, I'll have to think about when I'm writing out my questions. I I will tell you without saying what it was. I've used hypotheticals with a source. It was a really I was proud of myself. I said, just suppose you were doing this. Would you do this or this? And the answer came back, I would do this. And I can't tell you what this is. It would be obvious exactly what I'm talking about. But it was a great way to find out an answer. But even then, I'm like, I don't, and if people are like, think just because a source tells me something, I believe it 100%. It's like, I've had sources. I had one specific source give me information that right away I was like, "This is not true," and I learned later, and I was like, "Why did you give me that information?" And it's like I'll still talk to that person, but and that person kind of has noted that they gave me bad information, and I know they knew it was bad information. So I'm aware of that. I am aware of disinfo. I am aware there are certain people that don't want UFO information out in the public sphere and will do what they need to do within reason. Then there are people that are desperately trying to keep it private, and we've talked about that on Twitter with the evangelical Christians, the Collins elite type folks. I'd love to ask Lou, if you were responsible for managing the portfolio over decades and were tasked with keeping it out of congressional oversight, how would you go about doing it? He probably would say, yeah, that's not a bad question. He would probably say exactly how they did it. The way it was done is pretty good. Eric Davis said they did it to keep it, they buried it so they would keep it away from the folks who wanted to kill the program because they thought it was demonic. Um, Originally, I'm not sure. I mean, according to who was it? Oh, Nick Redfern, the original Collins elite type folks were very much more open minded. And then, something not necessarily angelic, demonic. Now they supposedly that's what they believe now, but in the old days it was more, interdimensional beings. Some of them may be positive, some of them maybe negative. Um, but they've done a good job of keeping it from Congress. Hopefully that ends. I don't know how they're going to do it. You know, you got to get somebody who can be read into that program, and then if they decide this information is something the world should know, then maybe that's how we'll get it. You believe certain races or ethnicities. Sorry, I'm struggling to talk right now. Ethnicities have higher amounts of alien DNA. I have no idea. Does that make them superior? Will there be a disclosure, helter skelter? Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we have any alien DNA. I mean, I got started in this with Sitchin, Sakurai Sitchin. So I don't know how we prove that. Science would do that. DNA. We'd have to compare it to something else though. We'd have to get the alien being that we supposedly were, that interacted with us and created us allegedly and genetically engineered and compare our DNA. Of course, maybe their DNA isn't that far off from ours, so it'll be very difficult. But I'm not a DNA guy, so very basic. I'm fading quick. I'm raising 10 puppies. Sleep. What is that? Everyone have a kick-ass night. Thanks, Pix. Yeah. Good luck with the puppies. Certain journalist claims he has some unseen info that supports Lukatsky over Elizondo. You can probably guess what I'm talking about. I don't really know. I need specifics. Would this even matter as long as Congress is looking into it? No. But, whether or not, Lou has said without OSAP, there would be no ATIP. So let's see what comes in Lou's book. Lou's book will come out, and let's see if Lukatsky does more interviews. He obviously doesn't really like being in the public eye. So I need to know specifically supports Lukatsky or what part support. I mean, we know OSAP was a fully funded program. There's no way. I don't think Lou is claiming the funding ATIP got matched OSAP. I don't think he's claiming that. He's claiming they had funding. How much? I don't know. OSAP was 2 years, 50 full-time employees and other folks, and $22 million. So can I ask a question? What does it matter at this point? What question or who you ask it is? We have company. We always going to get the answers we're allowed to get. I'm not sure what you're asking. What does it matter? I mean, for me, I like doing this, so I'm going to keep doing it. If people want to watch or listen, they can. Other people think it's a waste of time to even talk about the government aspect and all that stuff, but I love that stuff. I like every aspect of it. I like this. I love the nuts and bolts. I love the quote unquote woo stuff. Trying to figure it out. I want to try to figure it out. Do I think I'm smart enough to figure out what the phenomenon is? No. But if I share enough information from various sources, maybe we as a group can figure out maybe one aspect of it. Um, I don't know if things will change as far as information sharing. I mean, I never thought we'd get to the point we are now, and I've been doing it for 26 years. So yeah, I mean, the last 4 years have been amazing. Never thought this would happen. So if you had asked me in 2016, I'd probably say, you know what, Shelly, you're right. We're not really getting anywhere. They're obviously here, but they're in control too. If they want to end this tomorrow, they could. They could show up in masses. They can come down. They could communicate with us. Somebody recently, I don't know who said it, but it was on Twitter. Like people are like, we may not be able to communicate with them. They're so advanced. But somebody's like, I think if they wanted to communicate, they could. I mean, people get telepathic messages that they understand, clean up your planet, take care of your planet. So maybe they can do really basic things like that. In the hybrid theory video by Tupacabra SG, he claims that someone told them we were hybrids. I doubt he would tell who told him that. Um, I don't know if you got that information from government sources. Would it surprise me if somebody proved that we have some connection and we're hybrids to some degree? No, but I don't know if that's the case. I know that seems like a cop out, but a lot of me just says, I don't know. Really interested in the whole AOI, AIO, MSG, AEIOU, and if the Pentagon is going to successfully take over that operational responsibility. As Lou said recently, he said the worry was that office, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. I think they've added security to that name. OUSDI, Lou said they're actually getting with the program lately. So that's good news. The folks he was really worried about. Maybe they see the writing on the wall now that Congress is focused on them. As long as Congress stays on this. And we saw with Senator Gillibrand, talking with the guy who was up for the new um, inspector general, she grilled him. She's like, before if before you become the new inspector general, you need to have the answer to those two questions about the DoD and how they've handled UAPs in writing to me before we vote. So as long as she stays on it and other folks stay on it, then maybe the OUSDI is going to be like, we really can't ignore this anymore. We can't, obfuscate anymore. So will you be asking Lou if there's a point when topics like Skinwalker, Hitchhiker, remote viewing will enter the discussion in Congress mainstream discussions? No, I will not ask him that. Part of that already has entered the language when they're talking about human related effects. Because if they do it the right way and they spend time with the witnesses who do have human related effects from UAP, they're going to get those stories. It's just part of it. If there are people who have had close encounters, there's going to be poltergeist activity in some of those folks. That's just how it is. Colm Keller talked about Hessdalen in Norway, and he also talked about Malmstrom, and he said those folks in the area, they had not just UFO sightings, they had the poltergeist activity, that kind of shadow beings. It happens everywhere. It's just whether or not they start talking about it openly in Congress, I think that's a ways down the road. Let's just get to where we are right now and see what happens. Obviously, if the witnesses are able to speak freely, then it's going to come up. But even those witnesses may not want to bring it up, and they don't want to hurt their credibility at this point. It's still stigma with UFOs, let alone talking about hitchhikers. Have any of the people you interviewed ever been threatened for covering these broad range of topics? No, I've never heard of anybody threatened. Or have you been discouraged from touching certain topics? The only thing I'll say is somebody did suggest that I don't use specific names when talking about the Air Force and the Collins elite evangelical types, because for me it's smart evidence. It's smart advice, because I mean I don't have evidence that those specific people are part of the problem. So it's just not smart to be mentioning names like that. But nobody has warned me off or discouraged me from talking about anything that I can think of. I'm trying to think. No, just not to use specific names. Man, I am really far behind on these questions. Let's see. Since they claim that's the group they intend to use to achieve the defense bill's requirements. Yeah, we'll see if that AOI group is the one. It's fine. I don't care what it's called. I don't care what group. I don't care where it is. As long as they do what they're supposed to do. That's all that matters. And as long as Congress stays on them, they're going to have to do it. If they don't, I mean, they could drag it out a little bit, which sucks. But eventually, as long as Gillibrand and Rubio and Gallego don't lose interest, we'll get to where we want to go. It just may take a little more time. What do you think about what happened with the CNN interview about the Tic Tac in the 60s that Skyfort claimed was a CIA report? Skyfort claimed was a CIA report? I mean, you're talking about what Lou talked about. He said it was declassified recently. I haven't watched the Greenwald's video or Green Street's video I saw on Twitter. I think they're making a bigger a deal out of that. Lou made a mistake, if that's what you're talking about. And people make mistakes, and people think it's some psyop, and Lou's lying to us. And it's like, why would he purposely lie when it's so easy? He obviously did not realize that document had been, if you're talking about the same document, with ET communication. Maybe I'm thinking about something different. People who are intent on digging up dirt on Lou need to, yeah, it's just like, come on. Him and Mellon, as much as I disagree with Mellon and Lou on various things over the years, but so what? Look at the work they're doing. I mean, there are still people who think they're both part of a psyop, or Lou is being fooled by people in the government who are carrying out a psyop, and Lou doesn't realize it. Do you think the nuts and bolts are related to the Poltergeist incidents, or are they completely separate? Um, it depends on if the nuts and bolts are how the nuts and bolts are created. I mean, if it's regular manufacturing, no. But if it's something that can create a craft out of thin air, then maybe that's connected to the poltergeist. I mean, it is a really huge question. Just for whatever reason, whenever people come close to these craft, and whether or not they are true nuts and bolts craft, I don't know. Um, I was listening to somebody talk about seances today, and the physical mediumship that goes on in a seance room, where the objects in the room just fly up and down so fast. They fly around the room. They don't hit anybody in the head. It's in pitch darkness, um, similar to a UFO. But I don't know if they're connected or not. I've made that speculation that some of the poltergeist activity and the beings from another dimension might be the same beings in a seance. But as far as connecting to nuts and bolts, I'm not sure. And now I'm talking too much and starting to get lightheaded. Also, I think she asked Lou about Close Encounters. What he said in GQ was interesting. I think the movie. I don't want to. Yeah, I, don't, I need to ask him about his own personal experiences. But um, Close Encounters was the first one I saw when I was 77, so I was 12. Shelly says, "I love you." Hearing you say that, but I don't know what you're talking about. What did I say? Um, Not trying to get you to divulge your questions early. Yeah, I'm not going to. But do you want to bring up in a clever way that DeLong's timeline with Luis is in any way? No, that's not on my list right now. The DeLong stuff, because he's going to say that's what Tom did, and I can't speak for Tom. The DeLong timeline with Luis in any capacity in his contacts. I mean, I could bring up McCaslin, but I don't think Lou's going to talk about that. So he doesn't like talking about other people unless he has their okay. So, He's not going to speak for Tom. That's the one thing. So I wouldn't spend a question on that. I don't think Lou is part of that. He hasn't said he was part of that whole beginning. He was asked later. If somehow, just let's say for argument's sake, Lou was part of the beginning and never told us, I don't think he would admit it at this point. But I don't think he was. I've never done CE5. I've never done a seance, but I know a decent amount about seances because I love physical mediumship. I don't know. I don't know if there's a similarity between CE5 and a seance, but the similarities I do see is with poltergeist activity. Um, a lot of times the phenomena takes a while to build up. Come up, come on. The phenomena. He's not supposed to be on camera because he needs a grooming, but he's here. So look at that guy. He needs a grooming so bad, right? It's been so long. He's so overgrown. So poltergeist, the stuff starts out like just light tapping, and it builds and it builds and it builds over time. Seances are like that too, physical mediumship. So it starts off with very basic phenomena, and then it gets worse. Not worse. Like it builds up more and more and more. So there may be a connection there. Paul Eno says he thinks with the poltergeist activity, it starts off very little. It scares you with little knocking in the walls. You get fearful. It feeds off that energy of fear, and then it gets worse and worse, and it feeds off it, and it gets stronger. I do, that theory does interest me that there are parasites. All right, you got to go. Not demons, but he's not the first one that said these things feed off of negative energy. There's been a long line of people over the years who have said that. Yeah, I don't think Lou's going to talk about life forms, but like I said, there are ways to ask certain questions, and I do have some in my head that I'll have written down that I will ask Lou. Yeah, Valet didn't think the ending was, he doesn't think they're ETs, so didn't like that ending. Oh, Lou said, I don't think you have to contact anybody right now except to thank these folks for doing what they're doing. You can write a letter to Gillibrand, Rubio, Gallego, all those folks, and just say thank you for doing that. That's what Lou suggested. He didn't say anything. You don't need to get on the case or anything like that to do this. We have the NDAA was passed. So just contact them and thank them for sticking their necks out and talking about a subject that is tough. Mellon gave them an out by saying this is about national security and about flight safety, so they can start out with that. We'll get to the other stuff down the road. If the 23-minute video or similar videos showing 90-degree turns ever get out, then we can go from there. And hopefully, as Lou said, people will realize on their own that we're dealing with something that's not it's not an adversary and it's not our tech. Yes, Cookie is camera ready, but he definitely needs a grooming. Why do you think about 216? He said, did he say 7 years? I don't know. I mean, a lot of things DeLong says. I don't think DeLong lies. I think DeLong tells stories of information he's been told. Whether or not he's been told the truth, I don't know. But if Tom says, like, so and so met with me and told me this, I believe it. The question is, did they tell him the truth? So there's no way to know that. I do hope he gets, I hope his movie does well and they make a ton of money off of that. Not because I own stock, because I own $250 in stock. Big deal. I want them to be successful. Oh, yes. I think there's a connection. I don't know about CE5, but I think seances and poltergeist activity and UFOs, because Paul Eno said there was in the 70s, 73. Walker, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. Paul Eno in the 70s said 1973 he was involved with a priest who was doing possessions. I think it was 5 out of the 7 possession cases had close encounters with, some of them look like grays. So there might be a connection between abductions and possession. It might be the same type of beings. I'm going to interview Paul Eno, and it's going to be I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully he will come on and let me talk to him, because I am in the same, a lot of what he says I agree with. As far as theories, it's all still a theory. So just remember that. Um, I'm sorry if I haven't got to every question. Yeah, I don't know if Tom. I don't know. I mean, some people talk about how they're trying to communicate with us, trying to send us a message, trying to get us to evolve to a certain level by sending us symbolic messages. And then you have people like Tom saying, it's all bad news. The bugs, he calls them the ankle biters. I'm open to all of that. I just wish I knew which one it was. I don't know. Um, Curious to see the next war book with Peter Lavenda and Tom. I don't think, yeah, I think it's a wasted question. No offense, UIP. I mean, um, I don't think he's going to say. Maybe he might answer how much investigating, like days, weeks, have you done on Roswell? I mean, for me, for Lou to say he believes Roswell 100%, Eric Davis has said it. Then you have Merrick, who's written the articles for The Hill. He's like, I don't believe it, and he quoted from the Air Force report, and then he quoted from another guy, Carl Flock. Um, I wish I could interview Davis because he would be the one to ask, because he would go further than Lou would go. And thank you for the comments about Cookie. He is 10 years old and still acts like a puppy. I don't know when he's going to slow down. I mean, they don't live. I saw somebody the other day with a. Yeah, I don't. And that's why I don't do CE4. I don't want to have a close encounter. I don't want anything to be complicated because my life is enough to be concerned about and deal with every day to worry about that. Um, let's see. I'm gonna call it quits soon. That's Yeah. I saw some of it today. I watched a little bit more of it. Yeah, he has a lot of information on Roswell. Him and Kevin Randall have done shows together too recently. I'm not sure if Tom Curry and Schmidt have done shows together recently. That's what I want. That's what I want our Congress people to do. Tell us what he did that with Jimmy Church in that event. I have that transcript. He did a little more than normal. Church pushed him, which was good. But it's like, why can't he say there's a craft that makes a right angle turn and stops on a dime? I don't understand. I mean, I understand, but that should be allowed. The phenomenon is like a diamond, different facets being different topics, nuts and bolts, crypto, NDAs. Only by turning the diamond around will we begin to understand everything is connected. And it may all be connected, or maybe a whole bunch of different intelligences, but the connection is they're all coming through some sort of portal, some sort of way to get into our world. The multiverse, they have a way of getting into this world, or maybe that's how all worlds are. It just happens. Or maybe certain areas of the country or the world, or where what's the word? The veil is thinner, where they can, where it's different worlds, you know, interact, or what's the word? Intersect with other worlds. There's too many questions for me to get to. I'm gonna get going here. 2 hours. I didn't think I would go 2 hours, but I appreciate questions. Yeah, it's not the UAP. It's the other stuff, but there's also information that's classified, but there's also information that's considered sensitive. So it's like, I would like that information to be shared. Um, but it's not. At least it's not yet. We need to get the inspector general to give Lou some. Maybe they have privately, like, you can talk about this. Don't worry about losing your clearance. This is okay to talk about, because I think he's probably gotten threatened if he talks about X, Y, and Z that he'll lose his clearance. But some of X, Y, and Z are not classified or should not be classified. Overclassification. Oh yeah. I'm definitely not full of crap, but I may be unhealthily I may have an unhealthy obsession with this subject. Um, Thanks, Walker. Yeah, the Lou interviews. I have to prepare for that and make sure I have at least have him cover some new ground. If you could pick up, and that was Walker. If you could pick up, if you could pick having a UFO video declassified, what would you pick? Well, I would say the 23-minute video that Lou has spoken about in various interviews, which he said if that video gets out, which he hopes it will be game over. People will realize this is not our technology and it's not adversarial technology. I think that's why you see Congress move. I think those folks have seen those videos. Remember, these folks in these intelligence committees, they have special, top secret SEI clearances, and a lot of their staff members too, so they could see it too. And as Lou said, Gillibrand's staff is really bright. That tells you the staff, there may be somebody on Gillibrand's staff who has her ear and who's telling her this is one of the most important subjects in the history of humanity. This is obviously not our technology. This is a winning formula for you in 2000. Remember, that's going to be part of her thinking too, which is fine. 2024, she's going to run again. I don't think she's going to win president, but um, she could. I mean, it depends on who she goes up against. Depends. If Biden doesn't run, it could be. If Biden doesn't run, it could be Rubio versus Gillibrand in 2024. That's another idea. Let us see video. I don't want pictures, but I'd be happy with pictures and a description for now. You know, bleeds through. Yeah, these other worlds bleed through into our world, and we probably bleed into their world. Paul Eno says some of them think we are ghosts. If you saw the others with Nicole Kidman, which I loved, I will say hi to Lou and thank you for your comments and everybody else. Um, What is CE5? CE5 is, I think Greer came up with that word where you're basically out there trying to communicate with UFOs, trying to get telepathic communication. James Iandoli is one of the best persons to ask for that. I don't know if you're meditating, but you're trying to have some communication. Hopefully they show up. You ask them to move, they move. Joseph Burke says he doesn't believe it may be something that's more of a virtual reality where they're imprinting this um, they're manipulating your perceptions and where they're making you think you see a UFO when it's really not a UFO. Like you'll be in the middle of traffic and you're the only one that sees something. That's because they're able to manipulate your perceptions where you're the only one experiencing that. And then where it's really not happening, it's really not happening in the physical world. That's one of his theories. He spent a lot of time with Greer and then broke away, just like Will Miller broke away from Greer. Um, Two really sharp people coming at it from a different angle, but they both broke away from Greer, so you know that tells me something. Have a great night, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. I am gonna call it quits, and I have to remember do Twitter updates for PJ and other people. Have a good night.